Could you go through the slides and talk
Sure.
about them?
We'll start with this slide right there. With that, that's actually a picture of a yield sign in Drobak, down south of Oslo, and it's called the Christmas City. Although Inger took me there, and it's called the Christmas City. I don't know why. They have one Christmas store, but they very much they do have like a Santa's mailbox type of thing, so people can send postcards, and they'll be postmarked with Drobak, the Christmas City. So that's what that is. That's a little Norwegian Nisa running away with his sack of toys. I went up to a friend's cabin, and I said Norwegians aren't all that friendly, but this Norwegian lady, she would tell me, she was also part Danish, so she said they're friendlier. And her husband is an American. He's lived there 40 plus years, just got his Norwegian citizenship. But, they invited us up to their cabin in Gulbrandsdalen, and it was absolutely gorgeous and a great time. It's truly a remote cabin. It's got a utedu, so it has electricity from a solar panel, and it has the internet. So it's got lights, but it's a very rustic cabin, and you can drive up to it in the summer, but in the winter you have to ski the last mile or so to get to the cabin. And this is just the changing of the guard outside the royal palace. As I said, we actually live just a few blocks from the palace, so this was on our walk from our house down to the National Theater metro station. We would walk right by the palace, so it was just absolutely gorgeous place to live, and I miss it every day. That's the Viking Ship Museum, and again, that's out on Bugdøy with several of the museums out there. A great place to go. I mentioned going down to visit my friend Anna in Tønsberg. That's where they dug up one of the Viking ships, the Oseberg ship, and she took me down there, and we went to the site where they dug that up and went to the Viking Center in that area. It's a really beautiful area. The Contiki Museum. My mother-in-law had read the book about Contiki, and so when we went to Norway, me and Joyce, her daughter, we definitely had to go to the Contiki Museum, and I got to do a ceremony or an event at the Contiki Museum with the American ambassador, and we had Thor Heyerdahl Jr. as one of the speakers. So he came and spoke to us about the expedition and about memories of his father, Thor Heyerdahl, and about his son, who had recreated the actual expedition in a replica balsa wood raft. So I spent a lot of time at the Contiki Museum learning about Thor Heyerdahl. It's Thor Heyerdahl's grandson. Oh, and this is these three swords. We were just talking about this before the meeting. These are a memorial in Stavanger, Norway. It memorializes King Harald Hairfair, I think, in 872, that time period, uniting all of Norway under one king. Uniting by defeating the other sub-king. So there's like one tall sword and like two smaller ones, basically. The king of Norway and his sub-kings that are part of his realm. So.
This was fairly recently. Was it 82 or so that it was 1982 that this was built?
Yes. So.
83.
83.
83. Thank you.
This is me and Joyce. We're on the Flom Railway. This is Myrdal, but that's where the Flom Railway comes up to. We did our Norway in a nutshell. As a consular officer, I met a lot of Americans that were doing Norway in a nutshell. Usually when they got into trouble on Norway in a nutshell, had something happen that caused a problem, they had to contact the embassy. Norway in a nutshell is just the very popular tour a lot of Americans do because it exposes you to the mountains and the fjords, and they have it set up so you can do it as a loop from Oslo. So a lot of people will do that. Joyce and I kind of made up our own. We did parts of the regular Norway in a nutshell, but one of the parts of it is that Flom Railway that comes up from Flom up to Myrdal, and it's an old railway that's going up from the fjord up into the mountains. Very beautiful.
Yeah. What sort of problems would they get into?
Americans get into every kind of problem you can imagine, but mostly, if they had their passport lost or stolen, they would always have to contact us to replace their passport, of course, to continue their trip. If they ended up in the hospital or if they ended up in jail. So we ended up with Americans all the time that they would have that. It was very common for Americans to get a DUI in Norway. And now that I'm back in the US, it always reminds me, because in Norway, it's zero tolerance for alcohol. So if you've had anything to drink at all, that's considered driving under the influence. Whereas in the US, there's some level of intoxication. So if you're a regular American and you're not thinking about it, it would be very easy to go to the bar and have a drink and then jump in your car and drive, which you do anytime you want to in the US. And one beer and driving, nobody would even think about that in the US. But in Norway, most people would not do that because they would be taking a great risk. So we dealt with a lot of that, but mostly lost and stolen passports.
What happens to an American who's arrested for a DUI?
Just a DUI.
This is yours.
They will let you go with a fine, and as long as you promise that you're going to pay the fine. They usually keep you in jail overnight, or if it's on the weekend, through the weekend, just because you are a foreigner who can leave the country, and they want to make sure that you're not going to leave the country without paying your fine. But in general, as long as it was a very minor offense, you'd get out of jail and just end up paying your fine.
Are Americans subject to the fine that scale to income?
Say that again?
Are Americans subject to the fine that scale to income?
You mean for what the fine is going to be?
Yeah. Or they not do that
Yes.
in Norway?
No, they do the same thing. The fine is based on your income. It's not a set fine. It's, so the more money you make, the higher your fine is going to be, which also causes Americans a bit of a problem. Like, tell me what my fine is. Well, we need all this information about your income level. Like, why? I will tell you, one of the sad things that happens on Norway in a nutshell is it's not uncommon for Americans to go do Norway in a nutshell kind of as the one big trip for their life. So sometimes you bring grandma or grandpa over, but primarily grandma. And if you have a medical emergency, end up in the hospital, because you're a little bit older and you're on this big trip, that can cause a problem. And we did have one death during the time that I was there of a family member. They were taking grandma on Norway in a nutshell, and she passed away. It was a little bit interesting because they continued on the trip. Apparently they had talked to grandma and she had said, no matter what happens, I want you guys to finish the trip and enjoy yourself. And that's what they did. So.
Okay.
This is me and Joyce at, I think we're at the ambassador's house at Christmas party.
Hmm.
I'm actually wearing my little German outfit. That's, we spent 6 years of my military career in Germany, and we both really like Germany. So I think that's my German outfit.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
This is actually one of the Sutnamai parades that I went to. Joyce and I, because we live close to the palace, we got there early and had a really good ringside seat at the palace, because you can see King Harald's up there waving to the crowd with the rest of the royal family. And so this is a Sutnamai celebration. This I hiked Bessigen. I'm trying to think. I hiked it twice. I think this is the first time I hiked it. Vestigen's, again, a very popular ridge up in Jotunheimen National Park. It's got a very, Vestigen itself is a little ridge part of it. So it's a long hike. It takes about 8 hours, but there's this one narrow ridge that you have to climb up that's a little bit difficult and scary. But the views are fantastic. And of course, Jotunheimen is, from all of the high points there, you're looking out as you see behind you at the mountains in Jotunheimen.
Beautiful scenery, yeah.
This is out on Bugdøy. This is actually part of the royal palace out on Bugdøy. Bugdøy was originally part of the royal holdings, and there's still the farm area out there that's the royal farm, and so this is all part of the royal palace out on Bugdøy. And this is up in Jotunheimen, but a little bit down the valley. This is just a stave church that Joyce and I stopped at, but one of the many, and there's not that many left in comparison to how many there were, but there are a few out there, and this is a beautiful stave church.
Is it Vågå?
Yes, that's correct.
Vågå. Yeah, I know
like
it.
Lom.
Yes, that's correct.
Looks like Lom.
So very nice. And of course, that's Pulpit Rock, or not Pulpit Rock. That's it's where they filmed
Preikestolen.
Preikestolen. Yes, I hiked Preikestolen. I was out on business in Stavanger, and I signed up with a guide, and it was one of those things where they take you out there and you hike Preikestolen. And I was the only one. There's supposed to be 7 people. I was the only one. The weather, as you see, was pretty bad. And I was with this guide. She drove all the way out there in the van, and we started hiking up there. It was cloudy, but then it started raining. It started sleeting. It started snowing. And if she hadn't have been there, I wouldn't have gone up. But she's done it 100 times, and I just followed her, and she just kind of went up. And there was hardly anybody there. You see the pictures. This type of picture, a lot of times there's 100 people off, outside of the picture waiting to go out and get this picture. There was maybe 5 or 6 of us up there that day. And we sat there and had lunch. It was very cloudy. And she said, well, let's just sit here for a few minutes in the rain, in the snow. But then the clouds parted, and it was just absolutely gorgeous. And then it was still started sleeting again, and we climbed up above it. I have some other pictures where we climbed up a little bit higher, and we're looking down onto Preikestolen, and there's just nobody on the rock at all. It was just gorgeous.
Mm-hmm. It looks, imagine it'd be very gorgeous in a more beautiful day, but yeah. Yeah.
And I wouldn't have done it without her. Mostly I didn't want to tell her I had to quit. I have family in Houston, Texas. So this is in Stavanger, which is the oil capital of Norway. And Houston, of course, the oil capital, some people say, in the US. So this is just right there by the bay of in Stavanger.
I take it they're sister cities or some type of arrangement.
Yes, yeah, they're sister cities as well.
Mm-hmm. That's not a very Norwegian picture.
No, not at all. I really like Stavanger. I like the west coast of the US, and I like the west coast of Norway. And Stavanger, there's a lot of military there. There's a big NATO base there, and there's a big international school we worked with the US Embassy. And there's the oil business. So I do think there's a lot of diversity in Stavanger, and certainly a very international feel, similar to what you get in Oslo, but a smaller population. I hiked the Saboteurs Trail in Ryukan right before I left, as a matter of fact. And for those of you who know the story of the saboteurs that blew up the heavy water plant that the Germans had taken over in Norway so they could try to build an atomic bomb. And there were 3 attempts I think, yeah, 3 attempts. They tried to send in some folks that didn't ever make it to Ryukyu, and then they bombed Ryukyu, and they eventually had to send in the saboteurs themselves to get into Ryukyu and blow up the heavy water. And even with that, they were able to rebuild it. There was a 4th attempt that happened down the railway line in the lake, where they sank the ferry that had the railway cars that had the heavy water. But the Saboteurs Trail took you from up on the plateau in Telemark down into the valley of Ryukyu, the same route that the Saboteurs took in World War II. Beautiful hike.
Okay, so that I think that's the last of the slides. So I'm going to stop the slideshow.